So today we're going to be looking at IELTS Academic Writing Task 1, and we're going to be looking at common mistakes related to vocabulary. So the week before last, we looked at common mistakes related to grammar. So today we're going to look at the difference between a 6.5 and a 7 in relation to accurate, precise, and correct word choice. So this is the task that we're going to be working from. The chart below shows the number and age of people involved in various artistic hobbies. You need to summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. So I've actually written an example with a few vocabulary mistakes, and we're going to go through them and see how we can improve it. Just to review the formula, we have covered this at length, but I'll just go through it again quickly. You'll want to write your response to this task in 4 parts. So your introduction, where you paraphrase the prompt or paraphrase the question or description of the chart. Your second paragraph is a general overview. This is where you're going to choose the most relevant trends or features and report on them. The detailed description is the third paragraph. This is where you actually add the statistics and do your detailed comparison. And the final sentence is a summary where you'll summarize the main trends and link the 2 charts. So here's an example. So the introduction tells us what the graph shows. The data provided gives information about the number and age groups of hobbyists in 4 different categories. Introduces what we're looking at. The general overview gives us the trends. Generally, women are more involved in hobby groups. Languages and painting have the highest number of people, whereas sculpture has the lowest number of people. Overall, people over the age of 50 are more involved in leisure activities. And generally, people under the age of 30 participate least in hobbies, in particular, those under the age of 20. So here we've got words like generally and overall. So we're just identifying the main trends for each hobby and each age group without giving data or statistics or percentages. We want to wait until paragraph 3 to do that. So language has the overall highest number of participants. Women by far form the majority at 40, while men are half that at 20. So here I'm supporting my trend by giving data. Painting has the second highest participation rate with 25 men and 30 women. The only group that has more male participation is sculpture. Men form twice the number of women in that hobby group, with only 10 males and 5 females. Over 50s make up the majority of all hobby participants at 42%. Under 30s make up the least, with under 20s being the minority at only 5%. As age increases, so does hobby participation. Under 30s make up 11%, under 40s 16%, and under 50s 26%. Then my summary. Overall, it can be seen that women participate in hobbies more than men, and the age group with the highest number of participants is over 50s. So my summary looks at, okay, what's more popular, hobbies with men or hobbies with women, and then what's the most popular age group. Okay, let's have a look at the criteria. This is how you're going to be graded on 4 aspects: task achievement, coherence and cohesion, vocabulary, and grammar. So task achievement means that you've met the word count. You have to write 150 words, no less. If you write any less, it's going to affect your score in this criteria. You need to select the appropriate information, meaning that you're not writing about random data or data that isn't that important. that you're writing about the appropriate information, meaning the most and the least, the most significant trends. Coherence and cohesion means that you logically structure your writing task, that your ideas are logically sequenced, that you use the appropriate structure, and you use cohesive devices appropriately. Cohesive devices are things like firstly, secondly, overall, in general. Okay, words that link your ideas together. Vocabulary means you use the correct word forms, meaning that you use the adjective, we're supposed to use the adjective and not the noun, for example, so that your word forms or word classes are correct. That you make the correct word choices, meaning that your word choices are accurate. You use less common vocabulary. Less common vocabulary meaning not typical vocabulary, that you show some more advanced and sophisticated words, and that you use the correct spelling. Grammar, that you use a variety of sentence structures, that your sentence structures are correct. You use the correct punctuation, meaning a full stop where you need a full stop, comma where you need a comma, apostrophe where you need apostrophe, and that the majority of your sentences are error-free. Today we're going to be focusing only on vocabulary. So, academic IELTS writing task 1 requires you to use accurate and wide vocabulary to present the data given in a pie chart, a bar chart, or a line graph, or mixed graphs. So for example, a pie and a bar and a line, or a table or a diagram that shows a process. Being able to use appropriate vocabulary, present main trends, compare and contrast data, and present a logical flow all contribute to a high band score. So to demonstrate that you have great vocabulary, you need to use correct synonyms. So sometimes we think that we're using a synonym, and it might actually be a synonym, but it might not be the exact correct word choice. So synonyms aren't always appropriate. We can't always replace a word with a synonym. And I'm going to show you an example of that in a bit. That you use a range of vocabulary, different words, interesting words. That you do not repeat the prompt, that you must paraphrase the prompt rather than copy it. You use less common vocabulary, so more sophisticated and advanced words that they may not expect you to use. That you do not use the same word more than once or twice in a paragraph, so avoid repetition. And that you use precise and accurate words in your sentence. So we're going to look at each of those things. Let's see if you can spot the mistakes in vocabulary related to repeating the prompt, repeating words in your paragraph, correct choice of synonyms, a good range of vocabulary, accurate vocabulary, and less common vocabulary. So here's our first example. Let's have a look at the prompt. The charts below show the number and age of people involved in various artistic hobbies. And now let's look at my introduction. The charts below show the number and range of people involved in various artistic hobbies. So what have I done there? What's the mistake? I've actually repeated the prompt. I've just copied it. So what do I need to do to show that I have a good range of vocabulary? I need to paraphrase the prompt. So here's an example. The data provided gives information about the number and age group of hobbyists in 4 different categories. Okay, so this is an example of showing a wide range of vocabulary, being able to paraphrase correctly. Next, generally, women are more involved in hobbies. Language and painting have the highest number of people, whereas sculpture has the lowest number of people. Overall, people over the age of 50 are more involved in hobbies. Generally, people under the age of 30 participate the least in hobbies. So there, what's the mistake? I've used repeated words. I've mentioned hobbies 3 times in that sentence, in that paragraph. So what do I want to do there? I need to use synonyms. So instead of repeating hobbies, I can replace it here with leisure activities and here with pastimes. So these are all good synonyms to avoid repeating words. Next, let's have a look at this paragraph. There are a few mistakes. Let's look at the first one. Here I've used the synonyms boys and girls to replace men and women. Now this is not actually the correct synonym because boys and girls are young, maybe under 18, and men and women are adults. So I haven't made the correct choice of synonyms here. So I need to correct that. So instead of saying men and women, I can say males and females. This is a more correct choice. Next, the only group that has more man participation is sculpture. This is not an accurate word choice here. Man is a noun. And participation is a noun. So I need to replace this with an adjective. What's the adjective of man? Male. So the only group that has more male participation is sculpture. Now my vocabulary in that sentence is more accurate. Next, I want to use some less common vocabulary to show that I have a wide range. So instead of the biggest group and the smallest group, I can use less common vocabulary like the majority and the minority instead of the smallest group and the largest group. All right, so here are some examples of how you can increase your vocabulary score by not repeating the prompt and paraphrasing instead, by using synonyms to avoid repeating the same word more than once or twice in a paragraph, choosing the correct synonyms, showing a range of vocabulary, using accurate choice, and using less common words. All right, so now we're going to look at some vocabulary for each part of the task. Okay, let's look at the vocabulary for the introduction. To introduce the task, you can do it in a few different ways. So here are some templates for you to use. For example, the given table shows the comparison of, or the provided diagram represents the difference between, the presented chart gives the number of, or the shown graph provides the amount of. You can use these interchangeably, okay? So you can swap and change, but this is basically a good structure and a good template for you to know how to introduce your task. And then what you'll need to do is at the end of that sentence, paraphrase the prompt. So give that a try with this example. So the graph below shows the average monthly temperatures in 3 major cities. I want you to use one of these structures and paraphrase the prompt to write your introductory sentence. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. You can just type your answer into the chat. All right, I'm going to show you an example or two examples of what I have written. The given graph provides information on the average temperatures each month in Paris, Boston, and Melbourne. So instead of saying the average monthly temperatures, I've said the average temperature each month. And then instead of saying in 3 major cities, I've actually mentioned the cities. Okay, so this is quite different to the prompt. Another example of how an introduction for that could have been written. The presented graph gives a comparison of the average temperature each month in Paris, Boston, and Melbourne. So you need to remember to be specific. You must always say what and where. So the what is the average temperature, and the where is 3 major cities, and they are Paris, Boston, and Melbourne. Next, moving into the general overview, let's have a look at some vocabulary to introduce the trends. So when we're talking about big changes in data, there are different ways that we can mention that. We can either use an adjective-noun structure or a verb-adverb structure. So we can say, for example, there was a considerable rise, or temperatures rose considerably. There was a substantial fall, or temperatures fell substantially. There was a significant increase, temperatures increased significantly. A sharp decrease, decreased sharply. A sudden drop, dropped suddenly. A dramatic surge, surged dramatically. So a surge is a really big, steep increase, which is why we use the adverb dramatically with it. All right, so this is to describe big changes. If we want to talk about small or minor changes, we can say there was a slight drop in temperature, or temperatures dropped slightly. There was an insignificant dip, or temperatures dipped insignificantly, meaning very minor. A moderate rise, rose moderately. A consistent increase, increased consistently. A steady decrease, or decreased steadily. So it doesn't matter if you use adjective, noun, or verb, adverb, as long as you use them correctly. When you're using verb, you want to make sure that you're always using the verb in the past tense to describe data, okay? Because we're assuming that this has already happened. All right. Steady, yeah, a steady decrease or a steady increase, meaning it went up gradually. It wasn't a huge increase or decrease. So steady means the same thing as consistent. All right, what about when we want to talk about highs and lows? So when the temperature reaches a high point, we can say that the temperature peaked or reached a peak. When we want to describe a low point, we can say temperatures reached a low or reached a low point. To describe uneven changes, we can use the noun, there was a fluctuation in temperatures, or temperatures fluctuated, verb in the past tense. No change, so when the data is like a straight line, an even line, we can say that the temperatures leveled off, the temperature stabilized, or there was a stabilization. Okay, so if we use the noun or the verb form, it's okay. It just shows that you're able to use, different vocabulary, different word forms flexibly. Okay, when you want to introduce the trend, to introduce the second paragraph, you can start off with, in general, there was a decrease, increase, or decline. Overall, there was a fluctuation. As observed, there was a slight or rapid increase or decrease. It can be seen that the data fluctuated, or it is clear that the data increased. Again, you can use these interchangeably, okay? So, let's have a go. For this part, for the general overview, you want to look for common trends and contrasting trends. Now, you're just talking about what increased and what decreased. You're not giving any data or statistics yet. So it can be seen that, or it can be observed that. What happened? Okay, I'm going to give you two examples of my general overview. First example, it can be seen that the temperatures in both Paris and Boston increased rapidly before peaking and then rapidly declining, whereas the temperatures in Melbourne decreased gradually before reaching a low and then increasing again. So as you can see in this general overview, I'm just describing the trends. I haven't given any data or statistics yet. Okay, so what happened? Paris and Boston increased, peaked, and then decreased. Melbourne decreased and then increased. Let's have a look. Paris and Boston increased, reached a peak, and decreased. What did Melbourne do? It decreased, reached a low, and then increased. Okay? So my comparison is both Paris and Boston showed a similar trend. Although the statistics are different, the trend is similar. The trend for both of them is up, yeah, before reaching a high, and then the trend for both of them is down. Then we can contrast that with the trend for Melbourne, which is opposite. The trend for Melbourne is down and then up. Okay, so in a simpler way of looking at it, up and down for 2, down and up for 1. So this is where we want to look at the similarities and look at the difference. And then the trend is either upward or downward. So let's look at another example. Overall, both Paris and Boston experienced a rapid increase, peak, and then a decrease in temperatures. Melbourne, on the other hand, displayed a decrease in temperatures before a gradual increase. So here I've said both because they're similar, and then I've said Melbourne on the other hand to show the contrast. Okay, now that I've said the main trends, what happened? 2 cities went up and then down, 1 city went down and then up. These are the trends. Now I want to describe that in detail, what actually happened in each month. Or not in each month, actually, we just want to look at the important months. So the important months are going to be what? The important months are going to be January, December, and then here, July, August, because this is where all the activity happened. The start, the middle, which is the high and the low, and the end. All right? We don't have to say what happened here in March. It doesn't matter. We don't have to say what happened here in October. It doesn't matter. So when it says in the instructions, select the main features, this is where you have to select and choose what's the most important thing for me to talk about. So you look at where the data started, where the main changes were, and where the data ended. So detailed description. Here is where we want to introduce statistics. So it increased by 10%, or started at 10% and increased to 30%. Increased from 10 to 20. Okay? So just using, again, remember, past tense verbs and the correct prepositions. So give that a try. So you might want to start off first with Paris. What happened? Where did Paris start at? What did it increase to? What happened here between July and August? And then what did it decrease to? Then you might want to look at Boston. Where did it start? Then you want to go to the highest point. When did it peak? And then the lowest point. Melbourne, the highest point of where it started, the lowest point, the highest point of where it ended. So you're always looking at the start, the middle, at the end, the high and the low. Okay, I'm just going to talk you through it before I show you my example. So if we want to start off with Paris as the first city, we can say that the temperature in Paris started at around 7, 8 degrees. Okay, it then climbed steadily until it reached about 23 degrees in July. Okay, and it stabilized, it leveled off, and it remained the same temperature from July to August before dropping to about 8 degrees in December. Then we're going to look at Boston. So Boston started at under 5 degrees before increasing rapidly up to about 32 degrees in August, and then decreasing quite dramatically to 5 degrees in December. Melbourne started at about 26 degrees, dropped to about 16 in July, and then increased again to about 26 in December. So for the sake of logical progression of your ideas, do each city separately. So what happened to Paris? What happened to Boston? What happened to Melbourne? Okay, it divides your ideas, it makes it much more coherent and easier to read. When you try to compare what happened in the cities all together in one sentence, it starts to get a bit messy and confusing. Okay, so let's keep them separate. Let's have a look. The temperature in Boston started at below 5 degrees in January and peaked at about 33 degrees in August. So it started low, then reached a peak, then it fell rapidly to a low of 5 in December. That's Boston. Now Paris showed an increase with temperature starting around 7 degrees before leveling off between July and August at just under 25 degrees. The temperature then fell considerably, reaching a low of 10 degrees by the end of the year. So instead of December, I said the end of the year. Melbourne showed an opposite trend, with temperatures starting at 26 degrees, falling to about 16 in July, and climbing back up to 26 degrees in September. So you notice that I used past tense, started at, then it peaked, then it fell, then it showed, okay? Now, when have I used the gerund? Starting, leveling, reaching, climbing, starting. When I use two past tense verbs in a sentence, the second one will be in gerund. So for example, Paris showed an increase with temperatures starting at. I can't say Paris showed an increase with temperatures started at. Okay, so the second one is in gerund. And also leveling off, the second. What about this example? The temperature fell considerably, reaching a low. Here, Melbourne showed first past tense verb, but then I've got two other past tense verbs in that sentence. But only the first one takes simple past, the following ones take gerund. Okay, let's move on now to vocabulary for our summary. This is the easy part. It's either overall or in general. It can be seen that. And then what's the main trend? The main trend is very clearly seen that Paris and Boston started low, increased, and went back low. Melbourne started high, decreased, and went back high. So this is our main trend. So overall, it can be seen that. Make your comparison. All right, I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, good summaries. Let's have a look at my example. In general, it can be seen that Paris and Boston experienced a temperature high in the middle of the year, while Melbourne was hottest at the beginning and end of the year. Here's one example. Another could be, oops, I thought I had another one, but I don't. Okay, overall, it can be seen that both Paris and Boston were coldest at the beginning and end of the year, whereas Melbourne was warmest at beginning and end of the year. Okay, so you can choose which comparison you wish to make there. A few comments about what you guys have written into the chats. Always remember, because you will lose points, cities always start with a capital letter. If you write Paris with a small p and Boston with a small b, you're going to lose points. Okay, that is related to punctuation. Any country name, city name, month, name of a month, name of a day, always have to start with a capital letter. Okay. And also another point, in your summary, you've already mentioned the data, the statistics, the percentages in your detailed overview, your third paragraph. The summary doesn't have any data. The summary just says, very simply, makes a comparison of what happened. Boston and Paris had the highest temperature in the middle of the year. Melbourne had the highest temperature at the beginning and end. The summary is just a general overview. All of the details are in part 3. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll actually go back and show you the end product. All right, so we have our introduction. The data provided gives information about. Paraphrase the prompt. Oh no, this is a different one, sorry. That's for a different chart. All right, so I don't actually have an end product for that, but let's just recap the vocabulary. So you want to make sure you're using correct synonyms. Remember, not all words can replace other words. You have to make sure that your synonyms are correct, that you use a range of vocabulary, which means you avoid repeating words from the prompt, and you avoid using the same word more than once or twice in a paragraph. Use less common vocabulary. So instead of saying always an increase, an increase, an increase, you can say, for example, a rise. Instead of saying a decrease or decreased, we can say dropped. We can say, plummeted. We can say fell. Okay, so using lots of different words for the same thing. Making sure that your word choices are precise and accurate. All right, so the main comments that I have about what you guys have written in is to do with punctuation. As I said before, making sure that your city names, your month names are always in capitals. Making sure that in your introduction,